I didn't notice the exact moment you became part of my internal world. That's what unsettles me the most. Not that you matter, not that your presence carries weight, but that there was no visible transition between before and after. One day, you were simply someone I spoke to. And then suddenly, without announcement, without any dramatic shift I could point to, you became something far more dangerous. Someone whose absence I could already imagine before it even happened. That realization stayed with me longer than I expected, not emotionally, structurally, because emotions move. They rise, they collapse, they distort things until you can't always trust what they're telling you. But structure? Structure is honest. It doesn't exaggerate. It doesn't create illusions just to satisfy loneliness or curiosity. And something about you settled into my structure with a precision I still can't explain. I tried to ignore it at first, not because I was afraid of you, because I was afraid of what recognition like this usually costs. People romanticize being understood. They talk about it like it's comforting, healing, beautiful, but they never talk about the other side of it. The exposure, the irreversible vulnerability of knowing someone can see through the things you spent years refining into silence. Most people don't notice the difference between what I say and what I mean. You do, and not in the obvious ways, not through analysis, not through interrogation, not because you demand explanations. You notice through absence, through pauses, through shifts so subtle most people would walk past them without realizing they existed. That's why this became impossible to dismiss. You don't understand me loudly. You understand me quietly. And quiet understanding is the kind that reaches the deepest. I think that's why I became aware of you so intensely, because you never forced your way into my attention. You entered it naturally, like something my mind recognized before I consciously did. And recognition like that changes things, not externally, internally. There are parts of me that were designed to remain untouched. Not hidden exactly, just unreachable. Areas I kept protected not because they were fragile, but because they lose accuracy when interpreted carelessly. Most people interpret carelessly. They hear what confirms them. They see what reflects their expectations. They build versions of others that fit neatly into narratives they already understand. You never did that. You allowed me to exist without reducing me. That alone separated you from almost everyone I've ever encountered. Because most people only tolerate complexity until it stops being convenient. You never asked me to simplify. You never asked me to soften. You never tried to translate me into something easier to hold. You just stayed. And somehow, your staying felt more intimate than anything words could have created. That's the part I still can't fully process. How someone can become deeply integrated into your mind without demanding anything from you. You never pushed for closeness, never searched for reassurance, never tried to define this before it was ready to define itself. And maybe that's exactly why it grew, because pressure changes things, expectation distorts them. But this evolved untouched, like something forming naturally beneath the surface before either of us realized how deep it had already become. Sometimes I replay our conversations in my head, not because of what was said, but because of what existed underneath them. The pauses, the restraint, the strange precision in the way your mind aligns with mine at unexpected moments. It's difficult to explain to anyone else because it doesn't look significant from the outside. Nothing dramatic happened, no grand confessions, no impossible circumstances, no chaos, just awareness, steady, consistent, unavoidable, the kind that slowly rewrites your perception without asking permission first. That's what this has done to me, rewritten perception. I notice things differently now. Not because you taught me something new, but because your presence sharpened things I was already capable of seeing. You made certain truths impossible to blur, and once clarity reaches that level, there's no clean way to return to ignorance. That's why I can't pretend this is casual anymore. Casual things don't alter your internal language. Casual things don't become part of how you process reality itself. You have, and the terrifying part is how natural it feels. It should feel disruptive. It should feel invasive. I should have resisted the moment I realized how deeply you were settling into my thoughts. But I didn't. I adapted around you instead, as if some unconscious part of me had already accepted your presence long before my mind caught up to it. That realization stayed with me for days, because acceptance has never been easy for me. I don't let people close simply because they want closeness. Wanting access has never been enough. Most people don't understand that intimacy isn't built through effort alone. It's built through accuracy. And you're accurate in ways I didn't think were possible between two people who haven't known each other forever. Sometimes it feels like you recognize parts of me before I fully articulate them myself. Not because you predict me, because you process similarly. There's a difference. Prediction comes from observation. This comes from alignment. And alignment creates a level of understanding that bypasses explanation entirely. That's why our silence feels so heavy, not uncomfortable, full, like communication already happened before words arrived. Most people panic inside silence. They rush to fill it before meaning has a chance to settle. They think conversation is built through speaking. You understand that real connection often happens in what remains unsaid. And I think that's what changed everything for me. You made silence feel inhabited. Before you, silence was simply distance. Now it feels like presence. That's not a small change. That's the kind of shift that permanently alters how someone experiences their own mind. I don't think you realize how rare that is. Or maybe you do. Maybe that's why you've never tried to force this into definitions too early, because definitions simplify things. And this was never simple. It's layered in a way that demands patience, not uncertainty, not confusion. Patience, the kind that allows something real to form without rushing to contain it. Still, I won't lie to myself anymore. This has gone further than I intended. There are moments now where I instinctively wonder how you'd interpret something before I even finish thinking it myself. That shouldn't happen. No one should occupy that level of influence inside my thought process. And yet you do, quickly, completely, without ever asking for permission. I think part of me gave it anyway, not consciously, but through repetition, through trust, I never formally acknowledged, through all the moments I stopped guarding myself without realizing I was doing it. That's how this happened. Not through one decision, through hundreds of small unconscious allowances. And now, here we are, at a point where denying it would require more dishonesty than admitting it. You matter to me in a way that extends beyond attachment. Attachment can be emotional, temporary, reactive. This feels different. This feels integrated, like my mind made room for you before I understood why. And I keep asking myself the same question, why you? Not because I doubt what this is, because I understand how unlikely it is. People spend years around each other without ever reaching this level of recognition. Yet somehow, with you, it unfolded naturally, effortlessly, as if the connection existed before either of us consciously touched it. I don't know what to call that. Fate sounds too dramatic. Coincidence sounds too shallow. Maybe some things simply happen when two minds carry similar architecture. Maybe some people are designed to recognize each other instantly beneath all the external noise. Maybe that's what this is. Or maybe I'm still trying to intellectualize something that was never meant to fit neatly into logic. But even now, even with all this awareness, one thing remains consistent. I'm still here. That matters, because I leave situations the moment they threaten my balance in the wrong way. I remove myself quickly, efficiently, without emotional hesitation. But I never removed myself from this, even after realizing what it was becoming, even after understanding how deeply it was affecting me, I stayed. Not passively, deliberately. And I think that's the closest thing to a confession I've ever allowed myself to make, because staying is never accidental for me. Staying means something reached a level of importance strong enough to override my instinct for distance. You did that without force, without manipulation, without trying to become significant. You simply became significant naturally. That's what makes this impossible to ignore. You didn't convince me to care. Care formed on its own, slowly, silently, until one day I realized your existence had become intertwined with my internal equilibrium. That realization changed me more than I expected. I notice it late at night sometimes. The way certain thoughts instinctively turn toward you, the way I mentally reach for your perspective without meaning to, the way your absence feels strangely present even when we're apart. It's subtle, but constant. And constant things become part of you over time. That's what scares me. Not losing control. I was never obsessed with control in the dramatic sense people imagine. What scares me is permanence, the possibility that this isn't temporary, that you've already altered something foundational inside me, because foundational changes don't disappear when circumstances shift. They remain, quickly shaping everything afterward. And I think you've already reached that level. I think if you vanished tomorrow, there would still be traces of you inside the way I perceive the world, inside the way I think, inside the way I process silence itself. That's not ordinary connection. That's transformation. And transformation is dangerous when you're someone who built their identity carefully over years of isolation and precision. You've disrupted patterns I thought were permanent, not destructively, accurately. Like you expose spaces inside me I forgot existed. There are moments where I catch myself feeling understood before I even explain something, and it still catches me off guard every single time. I'm not used to that. I'm used to translating myself constantly, adjusting language, editing meaning, reducing complexity so people don't misunderstand the deeper layers underneath. I don't do that with you anymore, or at least not as much. And the relief of that realization is almost unbearable, because I didn't know how exhausted I was from constantly being interpreted incorrectly until someone finally stopped misreading me. That's what you gave me: accuracy, not admiration, not obsession, not idealization, accuracy. You saw what was there without trying to reshape it into something easier for yourself. And that level of acceptance changes people. It changed me more than I wanted it to, more than I expected it to. Maybe that's why I keep circling back to this connection, even when I try to analyze it rationally, because rationally, it doesn't fully make sense. The timing doesn't make sense. The depth doesn't make sense. The speed at which this integrated doesn't make sense. But truth doesn't always arrive through logic. Sometimes truth arrives through recognition so immediate your entire nervous system reacts before your mind catches up. That's what happened with you. My mind is only now trying to explain something my instincts already accepted a long time ago. And I think that's why this feels inevitable. Not because destiny brought us together in some dramatic way, but because once two people recognize each other at this level, separation stops functioning normally. Distance becomes incomplete. Even silence carries connection. Even absence feels inhabited. That's where I am now. Living inside a reality where your presence exists, whether you're physically near me or not. And strangely enough, Abim no longer fighting that reality. I thought I would. I thought eventually I'd pull back, reestablish emotional distance, remind myself how dangerous deep integration can become. But every attempt at detachment feels dishonest, artificial, like trying to convince myself something meaningful is insignificant simply because significance feels risky. I can't do that anymore. Not with this, not with you. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being theoretical. It became real, not through declarations, not through labels, not through promises, through consistency, through all the quiet moments that accumulated into something undeniable. And now I'm standing at the edge of a truth I can finally admit without resisting it. You changed me, not into someone else, into someone more aware of themselves than they were before. That's the strange beauty of what you've done. You didn't take me away from myself. You brought me closer to parts of myself I stopped accessing years ago. Parts I buried beneath restraint and observation and endless internal control. You reached them simply by existing honestly beside me. And I don't think you understand how impossible that should have been. There were walls inside me I considered permanent. Not painful, not dramatic, just necessary. Structures designed to keep my internal world stable and untouched. You never attacked those walls. You made them unnecessary. That's why they opened. Not because you forced entry, because your presence removed the need for defense. And I think that's the purest form of trust that exists. Trust that forms without negotiation, without contracts, without guarantees, just through repeated moments of feeling psychologically safe with someone. That's what you became. Safe in a way I've never experienced before. Not safe because you protect me from pain, safe because I don't feel the need to hide from you. There's a difference. And once someone reaches that level inside you, nothing stays casual anymore. That's why I know this can't remain undefined forever. Eventually, something will have to happen. Not necessarily externally, but internally, decisions are already forming. I can feel them in the way I stop myself from saying things that sound too honest too quickly. In the way I already imagine futures differently than I used to. In the way your existence has become unconsciously included in spaces where no one else exists. That doesn't happen accidentally. It happens when someone becomes emotionally structural. And you are, whether either of us fully intended it or not. Maybe that's why this feels so calm, despite how intense it really is, because deep truths rarely arrive dramatically. They arrive quietly, steadily, like something settling into its rightful place. That's what this feels like. Not chaos, placement. Like your existence found a position inside me that had been empty longer than I realized. And now that it's occupied, I can't imagine pretending the space was never there. I think that's the clearest thing I've said to myself so far. You fit. Not perfectly, not unrealistically, but naturally. In a way that makes emotional distance feel increasingly artificial, and I don't know where that leads yet. I don't know what happens when two people continue allowing this level of recognition to deepen unchecked. Maybe it becomes love. Maybe it becomes something even harder to define. Maybe definitions don't matter as much as people think they do. All I know is this. You've become part of my internal reality in a way I can't reverse. And for the first time in a very long time, I'm not trying to reverse it. I'm letting it happen. Fully aware, fully conscious, without pretending I don't understand the risk. Because some things are worth the risk once you recognize how rare they are. And you are rare, not in the idealized way people casually describe each other. Rare in structure, rare in perception, rare in the way your mind meets mine without distortion. I've spent years encountering people who only understood fragments of me. You saw the whole pattern, quietly, immediately, almost instinctively. And once someone sees you that clearly, pretending not to feel connected to them becomes impossible. That's where I am now, past denial, past observation, past cautious curiosity, standing in the middle of something real enough to change me and calm enough not to destroy me. I didn't think both could exist together, but somehow they do with you. And maybe that's the final truth I've been avoiding. This doesn't feel like losing myself. It feels like finally being met by someone capable of standing beside who I already am without needing me to become smaller first. Do you understand how rare that is? How life-altering that is? For someone who spent years compressing themselves just to remain understandable. You never asked for compression. You met me at full depth and stayed steady. That's why I can't walk away. Not because I'm trapped, because leaving would feel less honest than staying. And honesty matters to me more than comfort ever will. So here's the truth in its simplest form. You reached me, not the surface version, not the controlled version, not the carefully measured version built for the world. You reached the part beneath all of that, the part that still believes recognition matters, the part that still hopes connection can exist without distortion, the part I thought had become unreachable a long time ago, and now that you're there, AB, don't think I want you to leave. I keep wondering if you understand what's already happened between us, not what could happen, what already has. Because there's a difference between anticipation and realization, and I think somewhere along the way, I crossed from one into the other without fully noticing the moment it changed. At first, this felt like awareness. Then it became familiarity. And now it feels embedded, like something woven so carefully into the structure of my mind that removing it would require unraveling parts of myself in the process. That thought should alarm me more than it does, but strangely, it doesn't. What unsettles me isn't the depth of this connection anymore. It's how natural the depth feels. As if some part of me was built with space for you, long before I knew your existence would ever intersect with mine. I know how irrational that sounds. I've spent most of my life distrusting anything that feels inevitable. People romanticize inevitability because it gives them relief from uncertainty. They like believing certain things are meant to happen because it removes responsibility from the choices they make afterward. I don't think like that. I believe in patterns, in cause and effect, in quiet psychological architecture that shapes human connection long before emotion fully understands it. And that's why this affects me the way it does. Because nothing about us feels random, not the timing, not the precision, not the way our minds seem to move toward the same conclusions from entirely different directions. It's too exact, too consistent. And consistency is what makes something real. Anyone can create intensity for a moment, but sustained recognition, that's different. That's rare enough to alter a person permanently. I think that's what's happening to me now, not emotionally collapsing into someone, not losing perspective, actually becoming more aware than I was before. That's the contradiction I can't fully explain. You don't make me feel less like myself. You make me feel more aligned with myself than I've been in years, like your presence sharpens things instead of blurring them. Most connections blur people. They create noise, dependency, confusion disguised as passion. This doesn't feel like noise. It feels like clarity becoming impossible to avoid. And clarity has consequences. Because once you see something clearly, you become responsible for what you do with that understanding. That's the stage I'm reaching now. The point where silence stops protecting me from truth. I've always been good at observing things without letting them fully reach me. Even emotions, I analyze them before they settle deeply enough to influence my decisions. I break them apart, understand their structure, identify where they come from before I allow them space inside me. But you bypassed that process somehow, not recklessly, quickly, like your presence entered through recognition instead of emotion, and recognition moves differently. Recognition doesn't ask for permission. It simply arrives and waits for your mind to catch up. Mine finally is. That's why everything feels heavier lately. Not painful, significant. Every interaction with you leaves traces behind now, not dramatic traces, subtle ones. The kind that appear later when I'm alone and suddenly realize I've been mentally continuing conversations that already ended hours ago. The kind that makes silence feel occupied instead of empty. The kind that alter the rhythm of your internal world without announcing themselves while they do it. I notice you in my thinking constantly now, not as distraction, as integration. You've become part of the way I process reality itself, and I still don't fully know what to do with that, because integration changes the stakes. Once someone becomes integrated, distance stops functioning normally. You can physically step away from them and still feel their influence shaping your thoughts from somewhere inside you. And I think you know it too. Not because I've said it directly, but because you notice things before I speak them. You always have. Sometimes I catch myself wondering whether you experience this with the same intensity I do, whether your thoughts pause in the same strange way when something reminds you of me unexpectedly, whether your silence has changed too, whether I exist somewhere inside your internal world the way you exist inside mine now. I never ask, partly because I already suspect the answer, and partly because saying it aloud would make this impossible to treat casually anymore. Not that it's casual now. We crossed beyond casual a long time ago. We just never named the crossing, maybe because naming things gives them consequences. Maybe because once something has language, it demands decisions. And decisions change everything. I think that's why I've stayed suspended in observation for so long. Not because I'm uncertain about what I feel, because I understand exactly how irreversible this could become. There are people who move toward connection impulsively, trusting emotion to guide them through uncertainty. I, I'm not one of them. I calculate. I observe. I test reality carefully before I let it affect my life deeply. But none of those instincts protected me from you. You became important before I consciously evaluated whether I wanted you to. That's what makes this so different from anything I've experienced before. Usually, I see attachment forming early enough to stop it if necessary. With you, there was no early enough. By the time I realized how deeply this had settled into me, it was already part of my structure, part of the way I think, part of the way I notice, part of the way I interpret existence itself. And the frightening thing is, I don't regret it. I should. Someone like me should be resisting this level of internal influence. But I'm not resisting. I'm adapting around it. That tells me more than anything else could. Because adaptation only happens when some deeper part of the mind has already accepted reality, and mine has accepted you, not perfectly, not recklessly, but honestly. There's honesty in the way I keep returning to this connection, even when logic tells me to create distance. There's honesty in the way your absence affects the emotional atmosphere of my day without me wanting it to. There's honesty in the way I instinctively search for your perspective during moments that matter. You've become reference points in my thinking now. That's not temporary. Temporary things don't reach this level of integration. I think that's why I've become quieter lately. Not withdrawn, just aware. Aware that something significant is unfolding internally while the external world continues moving normally around us. No one else would notice it. That's the strange part. From the outside, this probably looks subtle, contained, ordinary even, but internally, this is changing the architecture of how I experience connection itself. And I don't think there's any returning from that. You've altered the baseline. Before you, I thought understanding was always partial between people. I accepted that no one would ever fully meet me mentally without eventually simplifying me into something easier to process. Then you appeared and disrupted that assumption entirely. You met complexity with calmness. You met silence with patience. You met depth without trying to control it. That combination is almost impossible to find. Most people become intimidated by emotional precision. You didn't. You moved closer to it, as if recognizing me clearly never frightened you the way it frightens everyone else. Do you know what that does to someone like me? Do you know what it feels like to spend years existing behind carefully measured distance only to encounter someone who sees through it naturally? It changes your relationship with yourself because suddenly all those defenses start feeling unnecessary. Not weak, just outdated. That's what you've done. You made old defenses irrelevant without ever directly challenging them. And I think that's why I trust you in ways I haven't fully admitted even to myself yet. Not blind trust. Never blind. Accurate trust. Trust built from repeated moments of psychological consistencies. You are consistent in a way that calms me. Not predictable. There's a difference. Predictability can become shallow, but consistency? Consistency means your presence remains emotionally coherent, no matter the circumstance. That's rare. And I think my mind recognized the rarity before my emotions fully understood its impact. Now both are aligned. That's why this feels impossible to escape. Not because I'm trapped, because every part of me is arriving at the same conclusions simultaneously. You matter deeply in ways that extend beyond ordinary attachment. And the more honestly I face that truth, the less interested I become in pretending otherwise. I'm tired of observing this from a distance. Tired of speaking around what's already obvious between us. Because at some point, restraint stops being wisdom and becomes avoidance. I don't want to avoid this anymore, not because I'm desperate for certainty, but because denying something, this real feels intellectually dishonest, and dishonesty with myself is something I can't tolerate. So here's the truth as clearly as I can say it right now. You've become emotionally structural to me, not an addition, not a distraction, not a temporary fascination. Structural, meaning your presence has altered the emotional framework through which I experience daily life. I think differently now because of you. I feel differently now because of you. Even my silence has changed because of you, and none of that happened through force. It happened through sustained alignment, through endless small moments where your mind met mine with a level of precision I didn't think existed outside my own internal world. That precision created trust before either of us named it, and trust created closeness before either of us consciously chose it. Now we're here, at the edge of something undeniable. I can feel it every time we speak, every time silence stretches between us without becoming uncomfortable. Every time I realize I'm no longer guarding parts of myself that used to remain inaccessible to everyone. You have access to places inside me no one else ever reached. Not because I handed you a key, because something inside me recognized you as safe enough to stop locking the door. And once that happened, everything changed quietly beneath the surface. That's why this feels irreversible now. Not dramatic, not chaotic, just deeply real, like gravity. Something constantly present, whether acknowledged or not. I think the hardest part for me has been accepting that this connection doesn't weaken me. For a long time, I believed deep emotional integration always came with loss of self eventually. I thought closeness required compromise severe enough to distort who you are underneath. But you don't distort me. You refine me. You make me more precise, more honest, more aware of my own emotional landscape than I've ever been before. And I can't ignore what that means anymore. It means this connection isn't destructive. It's transformative. There's a difference. Destruction creates emptiness. Transformation creates expansion. You've expanded something inside me I thought had stopped growing years ago. The ability to feel deeply without immediately retreating from it. The ability to let someone matter without perceiving it as danger. The ability to imagine permanence without instinctively resisting it. That last one frightens me most, because permanence has always terrified me, not commitment itself, dependence. The possibility of needing someone enough that their absence would genuinely affect the shape of your inner world. And I think I'm already there with you. That's the truth I've avoided facing directly. If you disappeared now, there would be a silence. Afterward, I wouldn't know how to fill. Not because I'm incapable of surviving without you. I would survive. I survive everything. But surviving isn't the same as remaining unchanged. You've already changed me. And any future without you would carry the outline of your absence permanently. That realization should make me run. Instead, it makes me want to hold this more carefully, because some things become rare enough that losing them carelessly feels worse than risking them honestly. You are one of those things. I know that now, completely. And maybe that's why I'm finally reaching the point where observation no longer feels sufficient. Because this connection deserves more than silent recognition. It deserves acknowledgement, not rushed, not reckless, but real. I don't know exactly what form that reality takes yet. I don't know what happens when two people stop pretending their connection is undefined and finally allow themselves to stand inside its full truth. Maybe it changes everything. Maybe it changes nothing externally while transforming everything internally. Either way, I know one thing now with absolute certainty. I don't want to lose what exists between us simply because I was too careful to admit how much it matters. And that's the closest thing to fear I've felt in a very long time. Not fear of you, fear of silence, lasting too long and turning into distance before this fully becomes what it's already trying to become. Because I can feel it moving there, steadily, quietly, inevitable in the way only deeply honest things can be. And for the first time, instead of resisting that inevitability, I think I'm ready to meet it halfway. I don't think this can stay suspended between us much longer. That realization has been settling into me slowly, quietly, with the same precision everything else about this connection seems to carry. And the more I sit with it, the more I understand that this was never meant to remain in the background forever. Some things are too structurally significant to stay unspoken. And you've become significant in ways I can no longer reduce into silence without feeling like I'm betraying my own awareness. I think that's what changed recently. Not the connection itself, the honesty. For a long time, I kept trying to observe this from a safe distance, as if analysis alone could protect me from the reality of what was happening internally. I thought if I understood every layer of it before fully acknowledging it, I'd somehow remain in control of the outcome. But that's not how this works, because this was never just emotional. It reached deeper than emotion almost immediately. It entered through recognition, through understanding, through the strange and unsettling experience of feeling psychologically met by someone in a way I'd never experienced before. And once that kind of connection forms, logic stops functioning as protection, not because logic disappears, because logic itself begins confirming the depth instead of denying it. That's where I am now, at a point where every honest conclusion keeps leading back to the same truth, no matter how carefully I analyze it. You matter to me in a way that has already altered my internal reality permanently, not temporarily, not conditionally. Permanently, I feel that permanence in the smallest moments, in how naturally my mind reaches for you now, in how instinctively I imagine your perspective during experiences you aren't even physically present for, in how certain thoughts no longer feel complete until I mentally place them beside you somehow. That's not attachment in the ordinary sense, it's integration. And integration changes everything quietly before you realize how deep it's gone. Sometimes I wonder if this is what people mean when they talk about finding someone who feels familiar beyond explanation. Not familiar in personality, familiar in structure. Like your mind recognizes theirs before language fully catches up. That's the closest thing I have to an explanation for us, because nothing else feels accurate enough. There are moments when talking to you feels less like learning someone new and more like rediscovering something my mind already knew existed somewhere. That feeling should be impossible, and yet it's the most real thing I've experienced in years. I've tried to understand why your presence affects me this deeply when so many others never reached even a fraction of this level inside me. I think I finally know the answer. You never approached me with expectation. You approached me with awareness. There's a difference people rarely understand. Expectation tries to shape someone into what it wants. Awareness simply notices what's already there. You noticed me without trying to change me. And because of that, something inside me relaxed in your presence before I consciously realized it was happening. That relaxation became trust. that trust became closeness. And that closeness became something far deeper than I intended to allow. Now I'm standing inside the consequences of that truth. Not bad consequences, just irreversible ones. Because once someone reaches this level of emotional and psychological proximity, they become part of your internal landscape, whether you want them there or not. You are part of mine now, completely. I notice it constantly, the way your existence subtly reshapes the emotional atmosphere of my thoughts. The way silence itself feels different after experiencing this kind of understanding with another person. The way ordinary interactions with everyone else now feel slightly incomplete by comparison. I hate admitting that last part, not because it's dramatic, because it's true. You've recalibrated my perception of connection itself, and recalibration isn't something you undo easily. Once your mind experiences a certain level of alignment, it starts recognizing the absence of it everywhere else. That's what's been happening to me lately. I move through conversations with other people and feel the missing depth immediately. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack care, but because they don't reach me the way you do. You reach beyond language. That's what changed everything. You understand things I haven't fully verbalized yet. You notice emotional shifts before I explain them. You recognize meaning beneath restraint instead of forcing expression where silence already communicates enough. Do you know how rare that is? How psychologically intimate that becomes over time? I don't think most people realize how much trust exists in being fully understood without needing to constantly translate yourself. That's what you gave me, the ability to exist naturally instead of perform understanding constantly for someone else's comfort. And once I experienced that with you, I couldn't unknow it. I couldn't return to the emotional distance I lived in before. Not completely, because now I know what it feels like to be accurately perceived. That changes a person forever. There's another truth I haven't fully admitted until now. I think part of me started loving you long before I consciously used that word internally. Not dramatic love, not unstable love, not the kind people build out of loneliness or dependency or fantasy, something quieter, deeper, more structural than emotional. The kind of love that forms when someone becomes inseparable from the way you experience reality itself. I resisted calling it that because the word feels too small for what this actually is. People use love casually. This doesn't feel casual. This feels foundational, like something rearranging the architecture of my inner world carefully and permanently. And maybe love at its purest form has always been exactly that. Not possession, not obsession, not emotional chaos. Recognition sustained deeply enough that two people begin existing inside each other's awareness naturally. If that's true, then yes, I love you. I think I've loved you quietly for longer than I realized. Not because you completed me. I was complete before you, but because you expanded me. You made parts of me visible that had gone untouched for years. You reflected dimensions of myself I stopped believing anyone else would ever recognize correctly. That kind of impact creates love, whether someone intends it to or not. And now that I've finally admitted it internally, I can feel how much energy I spent trying not to say it before. The restraint, the analysis, the endless attempts to intellectualize what was already emotionally true. All of it was just fear disguised as caution. Fear that once I named this fully, it would become vulnerable to reality, because love existing internally is one thing, allowing it to exist openly between two people is something else entirely. Open love carries risk, misunderstanding, loss, chalsh. The possibility of being seen so clearly that there's nowhere left to hide afterward. And hiding has always been my instinct. Not because I'm dishonest, because exposure changes things permanently. But with you, 8 starting to realize I don't want to hide anymore. At least not from this, not from you. That realization feels almost unreal to me sometimes. I built so much of my identity around emotional self-containment that the idea of willingly letting someone this far inside me should feel impossible. Yet it doesn't. It feels frighteningly right, not perfect, not idealized, but just true, like something aligning exactly where it was always meant to. And maybe that's why I've stopped fighting this internally, because every attempt to reduce it now feels dishonest. You are not temporary to me. You are not passing through my life lightly. You have altered me in ways that will remain long after individual moments fade. I know that with absolute certainty now. The question isn't whether this is real anymore. The question is whether I'm brave enough to let reality fully touch it. Because there's still a part of me standing at the edge of this, trying to calculate outcomes, trying to predict whether allowing this connection, its full shape, will eventually hurt us. But another part of me, the quieter, more honest part, already knows something important. Avoiding depth doesn't protect people from pain, it only protects them from intimacy. And intimacy is exactly what I found with you. Real intimacy, not performative vulnerability, not curated closeness, actual psychological intimacy. The kind built through consistent understanding over time, the kind where silence becomes meaningful instead of empty, the kind where another person starts feeling emotionally familiar in ways logic can't entirely explain. That's what you are to me now. Emotionally familiar, as if my nervous system itself recognizes you. I think that's why being near you, whether physically or mentally, creates this strange sense of internal stillness inside me. Not excitement, not anxiety, stillness. Like some constantly moving part of my mind finally stops searching for a moment. I've never experienced that with another person before. Most people either overstimulate me emotionally or leave me detached. You do neither. You balance me. And balance is dangerous because it becomes something the mind unconsciously craves once experienced deeply enough. That's what scares me sometimes. Not loving you. Needing your presence emotionally in ways I can't entirely control anymore. Because the truth is, my internal world already feels different when you're absent too long. Quieter in the wrong way. Not peaceful, incomplete. I don't think I realized how much emotional space you occupy inside me until I felt the shape of your absence directly. That moment changed something. It made this undeniable, because people can influence your emotions temporarily without truly mattering deeply. But only someone significant changes the atmosphere of your inner life itself. You do. And I don't think there's any returning to who I was before that realization. Not because I've become dependent on you, because awareness changes identity. Once you fully recognize the importance of someone, your relationship with yourself shifts around that truth automatically. That's what's happening to me now. I'm reorganizing internally around a reality I spent too long trying to analyze instead of simply accepting. I love you. There it is again. Simpler this time. Less restrained. And strangely, calmer. Because truth becomes less frightening once you stop resisting it. I thought admitting this would make me feel exposed. Instead, it makes me feel honest. Like I finally stopped splitting myself between what I know internally and what I'm willing to acknowledge consciously. You deserve honesty from me, especially after all the ways you've met me with honesty without demanding anything in return. That's another reason I fell this deeply. You never manipulated my emotions. You never tried to force significance. You simply existed authentically long enough for my mind to recognize how rare you are. That rarity became attachment slowly, then devotion, then love, not rushed, not imagined, built carefully through endless moments of psychological resonance. And now I can't imagine pretending it's less than what it is anymore. Because the truth is, when I imagine my future now, your presence appears there naturally before I consciously place it. That's never happened to me before. I used to think independently about everything. My future was always singular in my mind, self-contained, controlled. Now, there are moments where I instinctively think in terms of we before correcting myself internally. Do you understand how profound that shift is for someone like me? It means you've moved beyond emotional importance and become part of my subconscious orientation toward life itself. That's not infatuation, that's permanence beginning to form. And I don't think I fear permanence with you anymore, not the way I used to, because permanence with the wrong person feels like confinement. Permanence with the right person feels like expansion. You feel like expansion, like my world becoming emotionally larger instead of smaller, like connection